Hello everyone, this is Fantastic Worlds, welcoming you back to Lovecraft Country and the Forbidden Rites of Cultist Simulator, and aka how the Rite cards work. Now, one of the major things about Cultist Simulator is that using the magic system can be a little difficult, it can be a little hard to understand, so we're going to be going these two episodes in an attempt to make it a little easier. This will be over the rites, which are the actual cards you use for magical effects. The next episode will be for the rituals. Those are the actual effects you create and how they affect the game. So, without further ado, let's drop into the concept of ceremonial magic within the Cultist Simulator universe. So, let's get to the sexy part of the game and occult lore in general. Magic, making the unseen forces of reality bend to your will with incantations and tools and performance. That is, if the unseen forces don't bend you to their will. So how does this work in universe? One of the best descriptions I've heard for magic is empowered symbolism. Every part of a magical working, the words, the motions, the tools, the area, the participants themselves, symbolically evoke a concept important to the spell. Symbolic not only to the magician, but also to the universe itself by invoking what is commonly known as archetypes. An archetype is a term from both Platonic and Jungian philosophies for the primal forms and symbols of the collective unconscious of the universe that form the symbolic language of creation itself. Learning a systematic approach and working relationship to this symbolic language and the forces attached to them is often the first stage of studying an established tradition of magical practice. More often than not, in the game and real life, a would-be student of the occult crafts their own system with scraps of dubious lore, their intuition, and trial and error. The way the game uses to tap into this archetypical language is what's known as ceremonial magic. It's also known as ritual magic, but to avoid confusing it with the ritual cards in the game, I won't be using that term. Ceremonial magic is an attempt to tap into the archetypal forces of the universe by symbolically reenacting a mythic story sacred to some spirit, god, or entity of power. In the Cultist Simulator universe, these are the hours. Now, this is an attempt to entreat them to lend their power to the worker and the caster. While this sort of magic is often portrayed in fiction as people in a circle chanting around a bloodstained altar dedicated to some demonic-like being, you're probably much more familiar with a real-world version of ceremonial magic. The Eucharist, the core ritual of Christian Mass, is a form of ceremonial magic reenacting the actions of Jesus during the Last Supper of the Christian mythos in order to form a symbolic link to Jesus and renews the congregation's covenant with their Messiah. Or as the good book says, and as they were eating, he took bread and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." And then he took a cup, which he had given thanks, he gave to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, "This is the blood of my covenant, which is poured out for many." Mark 14:22-24. So yes, the Bible has magical rites in it too. Several of them, in fact. Now, the priest is symbolically representing Jesus in the ritual of the Eucharist, the wine or grape juice, and the wafers symbolically represent the wine and bread served by the hand of the Messiah to his apostles. By reenacting this portion of the Last Supper in the ceremony, the intent is to have Jesus empower the priest as his representative to bless the congregation. However, in a cosmic horror universe, the gods and the ceremonies dedicated to them are not as comforting. So with that in mind, let's go over the rites available to you in the game. Each are obtained from reading the appropriate books, or in one case a film, along with the lore the book gives you. Each rite card, when activated, will display 4 boxes to place additional cards. There is, however, an odd man out, but we'll get into that one later. The first slot for these is always for a lore card. This represents the magical knowledge necessary to enact the rite. The last card is always for your desire card. This is so you can use the ritual when your desire card is fully upgraded to ascend your character to godhood and win that run of the game. Except for this event, that slot is unused. The other 2 slots are for one of the 2 following types of cards: followers, tools, ingredients, or influences. Each rite has a unique combination of the 2. What's important to note is that one of these slots has a small flame at the bottom's edge. That means whatever is placed in this slot to empower this rite will be consumed and removed from the game. Whatever is consumed is gone forever, so pay attention to what you're willing to give up for your ritual. Influences and ingredients are renewable within the game. Followers and tools, less so. Everything has a price, be sure you're willing to pay it. The first rite we're going over is the Rite of the Map's Edge. Now this one can be located in 2 books. The first one is a true and complete accounting of the sleeping mysteries of the roots of the house. Yes, occult books can get pretty darn wordy. Purchased from Orpheum's auction house. Now, because or if there are a lot of books, you can buy both from the auction house and the bookstore. This one you're probably not going to get until you drain the bookstore completely dry and then switch back over to the auction house. The second copy, which is actually a little easier to get, is called On Mythius and the Amethyst Imago Loss, which you can get from the Guar Inn. And that is a level 4 vault. This also should be one of your first hits when you get to the level 4 expeditions, because it's got a lot of books and it's a relatively easy run. Now the two slots that are open for this to use are the Tool and the Influence cards. And the Influence is what is consumed, so this makes this a pretty low cost ritual. Now the description is, the Vagabond is the only hour that never enters the Mansis. The rite must be formed in the right place in the right time, and the Vagabond will take that rightness for her own. The dedication, of course, is to the Vagabond. That is the hour that will be responding to this ritual. And, of course, because the Vagabond is an aspect of chaos, it makes sense that essentially it would be any random place that you would probably find through divination or some other form of enforced synchronicity. Okay, so the next one. Okay, so if you've seen any of my runs, you're going to know this rite, the Sunset Rite. It's one of my standbys, because you can get relatively easy. It's probably the second rite you're going to get after the one we just went over, from the Stum film bought from Oriflame's auction house. Stum means mute in German, as one of my commenters pointed out, which of course for a death-based principle would make sense. You can also get it from the Ivory Book from the Grunwald's Permanent Circus, but that is actually kind of a high-level vault. You're gonna get it from the auction house a lot quicker, unless you're not draining the bookstore, which is why aren't you? Two slots are a follower and an influence. The influence is what's consumed, so it makes it so easy to use. Followers are actually more numerous than tools. You're gonna and you can even buy them temporarily. And influence, of course, is one of the cheaper things you can get in the cards. You're going to be just showered in them. And the usefulness of the, for example, Dread with its 2 edge for summoning purposes, as well as getting rid of a toxic influence, is great. Now, the description is, the assistant must cry tears of genuine emotion, which are Asperg shed in the place where the influence lies. If all is done well, the Sun and Rags will consume the influence, acknowledge an ending, and lend its assistance. Now, the Sun and Rags is one of the 4 entities that were spawned from the death of the Sun by the Forge of Days. Yeah, we'll get into this later. But essentially, the Sun is dead in the mythological world, which is causing some of the problems in the Cultist Simulator universe, because the Sun represents things like time, which is why we have, of course, broken timelines. But in this case, what it's referring to is the Sun and Rags is the aspect of the Sun consuming energy to produce, well, life. In this case, however, because the Sun is dead, essentially it's a death god, what it will consume, in this case, is grief, the energy of an ending, which is why Dread works so well with it, I guess. And then it will consume that into pure magical energy for you to use. The dedication, of course, is to the Sun in Rags. Okay, next one. Okay, so the next rite is the Rite of Seas Feasting. Now, this is located in the 2 books again. One is Those Who Do Not Sleep, which is located in the Guar Inn, which makes it, again, one of the priorities early in the game to do, because you're not only going to get a bunch of really good lore books, you're going to get 2 rituals from it. Sorry, 2 rites. And of course, you can get it from the Thirsting Tantra, which is over in Firmir Abbey. It's a level 6 run, which is also another one you should be doing relatively mid-game to do. Now, the slots are Tool and Ingredient, and that's what makes it slightly less effective than the previous 2, because ingredients, while there are unlimited in the game, you can, of course, like, for example, send your forge people to make them randomly. They'll come up with the level 4 ingredients. And of course, there's a bunch of them you can get from random runs, like at the ring around the Rosy tactic I use, and you're constantly going around the unnumbered stones in order to pick up random items, which of course can include ingredients. Now, this description says the rite calls upon the witch and sister to close the gap between what is and what might be. The adept pours or hurls an offering to the water, preferably and not essentially the sea. The sea, of course, is related to the witch and sister because that is what drowned them, which gives the name of the rite. Because their drowning is how they ascended. Sea is feasting. The sea feasted on them. The sea devoured them. Now, the dedication is to the witch and sister. And the order these 2 come in is kind of important, because the witch is the creator, the sister is the destroyer. You get that reversed, and you come upon the sister and the witch, you can get entirely different results. But in this case, this ritual is relatively simple. You are sacrificing the ingredient to the sea, just as the witch and sister sacrificed themselves to the sea for ascension, and again replicating that sacred story to be able to create your magical effect. The Rite of Beast Division. This is a rite I will never use. It is located in 2 books. The first is The World Does Not Weep in the Foreman House, a level 6 vault, and the second is called the Second Glory in the Mausoleum of Wolves at a level 10 vault. Now this has 2 slots, Influence and Follower again, but the follower is the one being consumed. And the description explains how this happens. The assistant's name is taken from them in a place or on an occasion of power, and they are divided into 9 parts. Used to be hunted like an animal too, but times have changed. We're very civilized now about this. Yeah, this is dedicated to the Wolf Divided, which is in fact another one of the 4 entities that came out of the Dying of the Sun. In this case, it is Fenris. It is the dire wolf. It is the consumer of all things, because with the sun's death, essentially the universe as we know it is running on borrowed time. Eventually, everything has to be consumed so it can be reborn again, and this is the entity that does it. So therefore, that is why you have to kill someone to do this. Now, obviously doing this with one of your cultists makes absolutely no sense. You only have so many of them. You could buy someone like one of the hirelings that you get along the game and use them, I suppose, or you could use a prisoner if you wanted to dispose of them that way, but frankly it's just not really that useful, and it comes as soon as you can get it is mid-game when you hit the level 6 expeditions. So again, like I said, it's probably one I'll never be using. Now, the interesting part about this is that the influence in this case is kind of like the scent that you draw the beast in with, and the follower is then eaten afterwards. I guess it's just like the influence is like the spice you put over them. The Rite of Crow's Quenching, located in one book, the Gemiad in the Vandersoft collection. Now, despite the fact that the collection expedition does have a curse on it, I recommend doing it anyways, because the Gemiad is one of the most powerful books in the game. Not only does it give you 2 lores of a decent amount, it also gives you this rite, and it is a level 2 tool that you keep even after you read it, that you can use for minor summoning rites. So slots are influence and ingredient, but it's the ingredient, not the influence, that's consumed. Of course, it makes it a little pricier, for example, so this rite is a little less useful than a couple of the other ones we've already gone over. Now, the description is the rite calls upon the beach crow at sunrise or moonrise. The crow accepts the sacrifice and returns the gifts of the earth. The dedication is to the beach crow. Now, this is to the crow or raven, which has got a long mythological history, essentially an older power that has moved into our world and adapted into it. And in this case, it is strongly connected to the witch and sister, which you notice the Geminiad, which of course means the Book of the Twins, is about, which means that the crow essentially is in their legend as one of their helpers. That's why they're also associated with the sea, the beach crow. So eventually you bribe Raven with a shiny, and they will bring the power of creation to empower your rite. The Rite of Mother's Mercy. Now, this rite is useful, but not as useful as some other rites. But the very interesting thing about it is the lore it adds. Now, this is located in 2 books, the Gospel of Zacchaeus, which is a pseudo-Gnostic gospel, devoted by a citadel, and the Twin Serpent Tantras in the Tower Revak. Now, both of these are level 8 expeditions, so you're not going to get access to this till mid-game, and its slots of the follower and ingredient are useful. You'll probably have access to Sunset Rite before this, which is a little better, but this is a good one if you got a good supply of ingredients. Now, it's the description, however, that makes it good. The assistant is offered in sacrifice to the mother of ants, but the mother knows healing as well as poison, and she will be merciful, accepting the substitute of a lesser offering. Usually, the experience is not reassuring for the assistant. Obviously, this is dedicated to the mother of ants, but what the description indicates is that this is probably a rite that was originally meant for the entity that she replaced, the 7 Coils, which is a sort of primordial Lovecraftian monstrosity like the Hydra or Tiamat in legend that was slain by the Colonel with the Mother of Ants' assistance. And as a result, she became the replacement for the 7 Coils, in which she has become, well, the fact that she has a human background means that she's more merciful. Now, this ritual probably originally included a human sacrifice to the Eldritch Abomination, the 7 Coils, to get its favor for this rite. But when the Mother of Ants took over, she brought human sensibilities. So what you do in order to enact the original rite, because she replaced the 7 Coils, is you pretend to sacrifice someone, but then say, no, let's give you this 8-point ingredient instead. Is that okay? And she'll say yes. And, and it's kind of like this formal pretending to have to do a sacrifice just for the for the cosmic bureaucracy, but then we just make a quick substitution on the side. It's kind of fascinating about how a change in an entity will change the culture around it. The Rite of Rebel Striving. Now, this is another rite that is more interesting for what it adds to the lore than what you can use it for in the game. Located in the Furious Tantra and the Tower Revac. Another reason to hit the Tower Revac if you're want all the rites, but I usually don't use those two, so it's not standard for my runs. As the Sun his course in the Mausoleum of Wolves, also a level 8. So again, those are two spots, Tower Revac and Mausoleum of Wolves, you can hit, which are a little harder, but you can get some decent return from. Slots include a follower and the tool consumed. Now the tool being consumed is the lore part of this. The light enacts a teaching of the Forge of Days. The artisan may achieve their highest goal only by destroying their most precious tool. The Lionsmith, which is one of the two Edge entities, knew this when he shattered his sword before the Colonel, the other Edge entity. So my assistant must destroy a chosen instrument. The dedication is to the Colonel, the Lionsmith, not the Forge of Days. They're the one who taught them this, but they have a different rite. And the reason this is interesting is that, well, I'll go over this in the Exile run a little bit more, but the Colonel and the Lionsmith are both the entities of Edge, because Edge represents conflict. And to have a conflict, you need two people, usually. There's actually a third Edge one, which is, of course, the Wolf Divided. But again, we'll go over that in the Exile run, or when we do a lore run on this particular aspect. Now, the Lionsmith is the entity of chaos and rebellion, and the Colonel is that of order by any means. So what happens is the Lionsmith originally worked with the Colonel, but when he wanted to break off, he shattered the sword the Colonel gave him to represent the guarding of the ways. The Lionsmith also, as you see in his card, uses a hammer only or the beasts around him, while the Colonel prefers weapons, being, of course, aspect of civilization, Lionsmith being an aspect of the wild, as it were. The Forge, of course, influence is shown in the hammer. I can go on forever about symbolism on tarot-like cards, but let's continue and move on to the next one. The Rite of the Watchman's Sorrow. Now, this is one that can be found in 3 places. It can be found in the book on What is Contained by Silver, which you can purchase from Moreland Shop or Oriflamme's auction house. Those indignities perpetuated by the deceitful fraternity of Obliviates you can find in Gladwin Lake, which is really a bunch of... it's basically a Twitter rant by somebody who's kicked out by the Secret Order of Obliviates, and the Watchful Tantra and the Vanderstuff collection. Like, you can get it pretty darn early. It's kind of weird, though, because you'll notice it uses follower and instrument, but the consume one is on the lore. Yeah, any lore you put into this will be consumed, and there's literally only so much lore in the game, so you want to be very careful about this. The only lore you get an infinite amount of, potentially, is Secret Histories, and Secret History is only good for summoning Teresa. I love Teresa, but really she's not that useful in the game. Now, the description is, the rite recalls the loss of the watchman who walks the house who has no walls, the mansis. Light goes before him and shadow behind, he must not see you. The instrument of power is used to summon him to take a sacrifice, precious knowledge from the root of your thoughts. The assistant must speak the words that anchor your sanity, so choose someone you trust. The last part isn't actually true. You can put one of your followers who has a resentment token on you, or you can even use a prisoner. Doesn't really matter. But the trick is with this one is the watchman is the replacement for the sun. The sun died. Somebody obviously has to hold the light of creations. But the problem is, the person who did it isn't a god. They were a person, which is why everything is so messed up. And not only that, they lack the concept of mercy. But again, we'll go into this if we get into the lore of the hours, which I hope to do sometime in the future. But in this case, since the watchman is imperfect, this is an example of the ritual replicating the kind of downgrade of the sun to something simpler. In this case, you are literally downgrading your intelligence by forgetting things in order to empower the spell. You can get it pretty early. Now, like I said, it's not super useful. I have used this in case of an emergency when I need to get a ritual done real fast, or I'm just overflowing in lore and I need to get something done quickly rather than try to arrange for the influence or ingredient. So you can have it in your back pocket, but you're going to have to think carefully about using it. Of course, it is dedicated to the Watchman. And this rite, again, is much more interesting for the lore it provides and how useful it is for the game. The Rite of the Crucible Soul. Now, this is located in 2 books on opposite sides of the game. The Burning of the Unburned God, which is in Moreland Shop or Oriflamme's auction house, which you're going to get pretty early in the game, and the Book of Dissolution, which is in the Hunter's Pit, which is a level 10 expedition you're going to get in the late game. The 2 slots are Tool and Follower. The follower is the one being consumed, for a reason we'll be going over shortly. The description is, the rite uses an instrument of power to set the blood of fire. Fire's legion of skin of the world. The assistant rarely survives unharmed. They die. There is no chance that they survive it. Now, the dedication is to the Forge of Days. Let's go over why. This refers to an event called the Intercalate, in which the Forge of Days consumed their lover, the sun in splendor, and divided into 4 pieces. We've already discussed what happened to 2 of those pieces in this episode. We'll discuss what happens to the other 2. And, of course, the whole event in general in a future episode. It's too interesting not to have its own episode. But essentially, the sun, there are multiple reasons for doing it. And the most relevant of which is the concept in a lot of pagan religions that the earth goddess gives birth to the sun god and then destroys, consumes them, and rebirths them for the next year. This is kind of all what comes around winter solstice. Now, the forge goddess doing this is an interesting concept, possibly reflecting the advance of technology being important in its importance in this world. But we're in the Cultist Simulator universe, haven't got to the rebirth section yet, so we're still kind of in those messed up periods between one age and the other. And this rite replicates that, which means essentially you're going to cut somebody in 4 pieces and throw them into a fire. And that replication of the Forge of Days, assassination of her lover, is what's going to empower the spell. Well, again, since there's only so many followers, unless you're doing it to mercenaries or people you really don't like, not a rite you're going to be using a lot. So let's talk about how that particular experience must have felt on the other side of the equation, the Rite Intercalate. Whereas the previous rite is going over this event, the destruction of the sun in splendor. From the Forge of Days point of view, this is doing it from the sun in splendor's point of view, which, it's extraordinarily painful. So it's located in 3 books, all of them in level 14 vaults. The Book of the Extinguished Heart in the Wreck of the Crucible, The Scar in the Sky by St. Terinto of the Deep Door Monastery, and the Time of Division in Fort Garrick. Now, essentially, once you get level 14, expeditions rather commonly, you're going to be able to get this rather quickly. Now, you notice it's extremely different, and it has 6 slots instead of 4, and all of them except Desire are consumable, which means everything you put into this particular rite is destroyed. The rite recapitulates the sun's abominable fate it used in extreme times by foolish adepts. So why would you be foolish enough to use this? 2 reasons. 1, very minor. If you're doing a Forge Apostle run, it has influence and ingredient. Once you have it, you can use it to upgrade your bitter salts to the level 4 stage that you need to get the end game requirements. The major reason you use it is it makes Ascension incredibly easy. Once you have the card, you can essentially almost always be able to ascend right there. One of the primary reasons is that you are required, in order to finish a aspirant run successfully, to have 36 of one aspect go through with your desire card to go up into the Mansis. Now, getting that with 5 slots instead of 3 slots, basically an average of 8 per slot instead of an average per 12 per slot, it's a lot easier. So once you have level 8 in average in those 5 cards from any source, you can essentially win the game. So it's one of the quickest ways to be able to ascend. I haven't used it in my own runs simply because I've been trying to demonstrate other ways of doing this, but if you've got this card, you've pretty much won the game. Now, so I hope you enjoyed this look into the rites of the Cultist Simulator universe, both in universal lore and in game function. Now, the next episode of this lore and tricks will be done for the rituals, the actual magical effects that you can create with the rites to have effect in the game, and of course the lore behind those as well. Now, of course, this episode was unlocked, I believe, at 750 subscriber, which tell you how long it took me to get this format down. Marks, and of course, we have had additional ones unlocked, and the next unlock for a lore episode is at 975 subscribers, which of course will unlock the 4th set of episodes, and I believe that was when we'll start getting into the lore of the aspects themselves. Now, of course, if you want to help unlock these episodes, you haven't subscribed already, what's stopping you? And if you want to know when this stuff comes out, don't be afraid to hit that notification button. In addition, there are links down below to the Gumroad payment platform if you wish to become a supporter of the channel, which will unlock additional material for you and additional episodes in the channel. We've already hit the 3rd stretch goal, which means that we are doing 3 bonus episodes a month, all of which are selected by the supporters and a monthly vote. And in the future, when I'm not running an active Cultist Simulator episode, I will be doing Cultist Simulator lore episodes as that part of the vote, so you can actually get additional ones if that's what you're interested in, and if you are a supporter. In any case, I will see you next week, probably with Darkest Dungeon, and after that will be the rituals, and then after that will be the next Exile run, the Defiance run in which we go to kill the foe. So, hope to see you there, and see you next time. Bye. I'd like to thank my Acolyte level supporters, whose contributions help this channel grow and hastens the inevitable digital apocalypse and rise of the Dark Lords of Content and Data.